Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. An update on the state of the U.S. housing market, appreciation, migration, vacancy rates, and more. Where exactly are people moving? And the key real estate word of the last few years, affordability, might now very well be replaced with something else. Today on Get Rich Education. Countless property investors get killed with maintenance costs, but that's far less likely when you buy brand new construction. Let me tell you about JWB Real Estate Capital in Jacksonville, Florida. They pioneered the build-to-rent model where you can invest in new construction, turnkey rental properties. That's why JWB was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. To learn more and see inventory, go to newconstructionturnkey.com. Finally, Total Control Financial gives you checkbook control of your 401k and IRA money to invest in real estate. It's time to get your retirement money into your own checking account, but you've got to avoid the little-known tax that you'll pay with any self-directed IRA. Instead, it's time for the QRP. Learn more and get your free copy of the QRP book by text messaging QRP in all capital letters to 72,000.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Hey, you're inside Get Rich Education. This is episode 255. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. The state of the real estate market today is really quite remarkable and full of superlatives ever since the second quarter numbers came in recently. Let's talk about them and what it means to you. The United States is now experiencing its lowest rental vacancy rates in 35 years. I'll tell you where they're at in just a moment. You know how I've long told you when running the numbers on an income property that you're looking to buy, 8% is a good rule of thumb, just a good loose guide for you to use as a vacancy factor. 8% is about 1 month per year that your long-term residential rental could be vacant. And hopefully you're doing better than that because we really get actionable with rental hotbed areas here at GRE. Well, the national number has ticked down to just 6.8%. Yes, a 6.8% national vacancy rate, the lowest in 35 years. To say that another way, that's an occupancy rate of more than 93% nationally. So that's for rental properties. As far as home ownership, and homeowner vacancy always runs substantially lower than the rental vacancy rate. Well, at the same time that the vacancy rate is now at multi-decade lows for rentals, we also have lower homeowner vacancy than we've had in 40 years. Yes, 40 years. And before I tell you the number, to be clear, what the homeowner vacancy rate is that it is the proportion of the homeowner inventory that is vacant and for sale. And the homeowner vacancy rate has now dropped down to 1.3%. Yes, that is then a homeowner occupancy rate of 98.7%. And that leads us to what I think you can say is the new, maybe key word that defines this era of real estate in the United States. Maybe it's not so much about affordability, though it still is surely, as it is about supply, low supply, this housing shortage, these generationally high records of both rental occupancy and homeowner occupancy simply means that there just are not very many empty homes out there. So let's look into why this is. There is an underproduction of new homes, especially these starter type homes that are so badly needed, but often it's more profitable for a builder to build a higher end home instead. Of course, you, the investor, you're often the one buying more of these starter type homes because they are the ones that make the best rentals. So because of this high occupancy and low supply, especially in entry-level homes, more of what they call older young adults, aged 25 to 34, they're living with their parents more than ever before. Because low supply, that makes it harder for these 30-year-olds to move out, so they're still living at home and taking out the trash for mom. Well, when you have low supply, that obviously puts upward pressure on prices, and that's our next figure. The national median existing single-family home price increased 4.3% annually, up 4.3% to $279,600 for the second quarter of this year. That is a record high price. And I don't think that's alarming in any way. That figure, $279,600, is not adjusted for inflation. And see, unlike the housing crisis and mortgage meltdown of 2007 to 2009, that crisis back then was steeped in problems of irresponsible lending practices and oversupply of housing. Today, we have pretty responsible lending practices, and as I just described, chronically tight supply. Also, the 4.3% year-over-year increase seems like a rather sustainable appreciation number. That 4.3% increase, that's just a nudge higher than what a lot of people were forecasting. A couple months ago here on the show, I pointed out that most agencies seem to have an average forecast of around 4% for an appreciation rate. But being just over that at 4.3%, it's partly due to lower supply, probably even more so than this next remarkable housing stat to tell you about. Hey, like I said, it really is a time of superlatives here in this market today. And that's that mortgage interest rates recently hit multi-year lows once again. But, for some buyers, including you as an investor, low mortgage rates aren't of much help if you can't get a hold of this supply, this low supply. So to sum it up in one sentence, low mortgage interest rates can make a good deal even sweeter for you, but it's really difficult to find the supply. Now let's dig deeper. This low supply is really critical in some areas. Now, it isn't always a case of builders not wanting to build the entry-level homes. Sometimes it's regulation. Some places might need some regulatory reform if they want to spur housing. In a lot of places, NIMBYism, yes, residents saying not in my backyard, and local governments have made a situation that makes construction of housing both a ridiculously lengthy process and prohibitively expensive. A lot of realtors and their groups are doing what they can to get governments to change this, but it's a pretty heavy lift, even with this overwhelming need for more housing. Now, what exactly do I mean by housing regulation? I'm talking about state and local governments imposing laws that do things like limit suburban sprawl, or perhaps imposing a restriction saying that a building height can only be so great, or restricting development in an area with an endangered bird or a threatened amphibian. Now, whether you think regulation is a good thing or a bad thing, that's not the point here. The point is that regulations continue to constrain supply. So because these regulations limit supply, that pushes up prices. So then regulation, whether you like it or not, is helping to push up the value of your real estate. Regulation is just one of the factors creating shortages. Environmentalism, regulation, and building restrictions all increase the price of your real estate. Yes, so your favorite heron or your spotted salamander protections or whatever it is, they tend to limit housing supply and drive up the price of housing. And there are winners and losers from housing regulations like this. The people that benefit the most are the current homeowners, and the people that lose out the most are renters. People looking to buy new homes are obviously harmed substantially too. Also, this burden falls disproportionately on poor households because they spend a bigger percentage of their income on housing than wealthier households do. And also, poorer households are more likely to be renters than homeowners. That's why regulation hurts them more. And with the passage of time, years and decades, there tend to be more building regulations and restrictions rather than fewer. So I hope you bought your real estate or you're buying more soon and locking up these low interest rates for 3 decades at the same time. Now, this is anecdotal, but those high-priced, volatile markets on the coasts, they tend to have more housing regulation than those places in inland America where we invest, what I call the stable markets. So again, this isn't about whether you personally think that a specific proposed regulation is good or bad, but when you're out there reading the news and you hear that a new regulation is being proposed, that might be your cue to buy before regulation is in place, because regulations correlate with higher prices and lower supply. The word of the last couple years in real estate, affordability, might change to supply. Hey, join me for Get Rich Education's Tampa Bay real estate field trip. That's coming up in only 6 weeks here. The name of the MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area, is technically Tampa, St. Petersburg, Clearwater, and this area of Florida is booming. The numbers work. People are moving to warmer climates and a low tax, low cost state. If you are ever going to invest out of market, this event gives you the rare opportunity to not only visit the exact neighborhoods and properties in the cash flowing sweet spot, but you can actually meet your team if you choose to use them, which, like I say, your team is even more important than your property itself. On our speaker day, which is the day before we tour the properties, I'll be there, and you'll also have your potential team in the room there, your turnkey provider, property manager, mortgage loan officer, and insurance agent. Of course, you can still choose whatever team you want if you don't think any of these people at the event have that winning smile or whatever. Get all the details and register at realestatefieldtrip.com. I'll be speaking, and I'll be with you for the entire event. It's October 10th through 12th, based at the Hyatt Place Hotel in St. Petersburg, Florida. Go to realestatefieldtrip.com. That's where you can register and get all the details. I've made the website super easy for you to land on and remember. Again, that's at realestatefieldtrip.com. Coming up here on the show in a few weeks, a university professor and I are going to talk about the real estate investor numbers that should matter the most to you. This guest is an Ivy League professor. In fact, yes, we'll be getting rather professorial on you in a few weeks. He has quite the Ivy League pedigree. He's a graduate of Yale University, and today he teaches real estate courses at Columbia University in New York City. That will be a valuable show. But we've got a great guest today, too, that really keeps his pulse on the state of the real estate market, foreclosures, home price appreciation, and net migration. Net migration is so important to you. That tells you where the people are moving away from and where the people are moving to. You're going to learn that only 11 of the 139 markets analyzed had year-over-year home price decreases, so about 92% of markets appreciated. Let's talk more about the state of the real estate market. Today's guest is the Vice President of Market Economics at Auction.com. His reporting has been cited by really every major media outlet that you can think of, and he's appeared on many national network broadcasts like on ABC, CBS, CNN, Fox Business, and more. And he's really done some important work in our industry. He was editor of the Housing News Report, which was named Best Newsletter by the National Association of Real Estate Editors. Welcome back to Get Rich Education, Daren Blomquist.
Thank you so much for having me, Keith. Good to be here again.
Daren, I want to ask you about some things like what's the latest with home price appreciation in the United States and talk about some of those migration trends. But before we do, I know that you do a lot of analysis on foreclosure activity. So can you speak to that dynamic and why that might be important to an investor that's buying a property not even out of foreclosure, but that's already been renovated?
Foreclosure activity affects investors in a couple ways. On the supply side, it's a measure of how much supply is out there for investors. Of course, investors can source supply other than foreclosures, but historically speaking, foreclosures has been a great source of inventory for investors to buy. Now, a lot of investors, your listeners, are buying from folks who are buying foreclosures and then rehabbing them, getting them in rent-ready condition.
Right.
So it's once removed from that supply, but that's one way the foreclosure rates impact investors. On the other side, more of, I guess, the demand side, you'd call it, foreclosure rates, if we were to see a spike in foreclosure starts, for instance, in a market. And I can talk a little bit about that, where there's a few areas where we're seeing increases, but overall it's down. That foreclosure increase could be just a signal that that market may be in trouble in some way and there may be some distress. That doesn't mean you stop investing in that market necessarily, but you may shift the way you buy or the strategy that you're using to buy. It actually may mean less competition. Other investors may get scared by that and you have an opportunity to buy at a lower price point, but it also could mean, that market is a little bit unstable. So those are the two ways, if those make sense, that foreclosure starts impact real estate investors. And then if you want me to jump in and give a high level overview of some of those numbers, I'd be happy to as well.
Just in general, foreclosures are down.
Yes, there were in May of 2019, the latest data we have available, foreclosure starts, which is the leading indicator of foreclosures. There were 29,000 of those nationwide. Those were down 12% from a year ago. That's continuing really several years of declines. And it's actually almost surprising that we continue to see these numbers go down. They're below pre-crisis levels. The last time we had a healthy, booming housing market, foreclosures were higher then than they are now. They're still happening, but they definitely are a rarity, even compared to the last housing boom.
Yeah, now a low unemployment rate can help lead to those low rate of foreclosures.
Absolutely. The leading cause of foreclosures traditionally, at least anecdotally, is that job loss. And so when you don't have a lot of people losing jobs or they can find a new job very quickly, you have less triggers for one of the biggest triggers, foreclosure has gone away. Now, what we were dealing with during the crisis and post-crisis in the first few years after, say, 2009 through 2015, there were really a lot of bad loans in the mix that were triggering foreclosures, these exotic loans, and those have mostly been cleared out of the pipeline. And so the vast majority of what you have left is foreclosures caused by job loss or some other life circumstance, and those are less systemic and more rare. And to your point with the job situation that we have, even if someone does lose a job, there's more likelihood that they're going to be able to get a job soon and start making that mortgage payment again.
That's a great point about the low foreclosure rate. We've just had that much more passage of time where ninja loans, which stands for no income, no job or assets, have been rooted out of the system. Negatively amortizing loans have been rooted out of the system. So now you have more of these responsible lending practices that prevail that increases that chance that a borrower is also going to be able to retain their home and make those payments.
That's right. Generally speaking, these lower foreclosure rates are a sign of a healthy housing market, and that's generally good for investors, other than that it does make it more competitive to find supply out there. And so finding good channels to get supply of properties to buy, and ideally buy at a discount, is the one piece that the lower foreclosure numbers are maybe not a positive for real estate investors.
Now, one thing that you do there at your company is you take housing, population, migration data, and you take these raw numbers and then you distill it down into a map. A lot of times you call this a heat map, which really makes some things stand out. And one of those is the home price appreciation by metro in the latest quarter ended. And there were a few notable areas in the red. So tell us about that home price appreciation heat map and what the blue means and what the red means.
This is, to me, one of the underreported stories. I look at a lot of housing news articles every day, what's going on. And this is, to me, one of the most underreported things, that there are actually parts of the country that are experiencing decreasing home prices. Home prices are going down. It's a very small portion of them, but it is happening. And they're in what I would call bellwether markets that traditionally have been hot markets. So the biggest one I would say that I would point out is San Jose. It's the biggest dot of red on our heat map there on the West Coast, where we're seeing in the second quarter of 2019, median home prices were down 6% from a year ago. That's actually the second consecutive quarter where we've seen home prices down, and this is on a year-over-year basis in San Jose. And so, yeah, that's a big deal. And then there's a clump of red near San Jose. San Francisco also saw a 2% decline in home prices, median home prices in the second quarter of this year. And Santa Rosa, a smaller metro up there, saw a 3% decline. That's one kind of clump of red that we see. Another clump of red we see. And again, the vast majority of the map is green, which is home prices are going up. but you do see some weakness over in Connecticut and Hartford and Bridgeport. Home prices down 8.3% in Bridgeport and 2.7% in Hartford. And then you have a few dots in the Middle West of decreasing price appreciation that was less startling to me because those markets they're a little bit more slow and steady markets, so it's not uncommon to see a little bit of a pullback occasionally. So places like Peoria, Des Moines, Kansas City are in that, but we haven't seen a long running pattern in those markets of those declines.
Yeah, and it seems like most of those markets in the Midwest and South are, I guess it's the green rather than the blue, meaning that home price appreciation is continuing there. And just as a general trend, the red, where we're seeing a loss in just a few markets, tend to be concentrated in coastal California and the Northeast. And that's really indicative of what we talk about here. They are the more volatile markets in general, with those prices that are less sustainable over time in the Northeast, maybe in South Florida and in the Western U.S. than they are inland, where those prices are more stable in general.
That's right. This was 139 markets I analyzed using public record data. Out of those 139 markets across the country, 11 had a year-over-year decrease in home price appreciation for the quarter. That's about 8% of all markets, and it's not uncommon to see that even in any given quarter. What really stood out to me is places like San Jose, San Francisco, seeing these declines, which we had not seen a decline in those markets since 2012. Before this recent last couple of quarters. So that is a sign, hey, look, these markets are a little bit overheated, I think. Maybe there's not a bubble there, but they're overheated. Affordability challenges are finally catching up with those markets, which also makes them poor markets probably to invest in for rentals because of those high price points that we have there. I mean, San Jose, not to spend too much time on that market, but it's got even though prices are down there, it has of those 139 markets, it has the highest median home price in the country at $1.1 million. That's a median home price right in the middle there in San Jose.
Yeah, those include a lot of markets where you're probably only getting a rent to value ratio of 0.3% when you buy a property. And that's just not a good formula for cash flow. Those numbers really don't work. One factor that governs home price appreciation is just simply the migration of people, net in migration versus net out migration. And that's something that you measure by state. I want to ask you about that in a moment. You're listening to Get Rich Education. Our guest is Daren Blomquist. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold.
Would you like to know the easiest way to create wealth and passive income with real estate? This is Marco Santarelli with Norada Real Estate Investments. Now you can access the best deals without the stress or hassle of having to find, renovate, or manage those properties. We save you time by providing you with passive income investment properties in some of the best U.S. markets. Learn more by downloading your free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Passive Real Estate Investing. There's no obligation and nothing to buy. Simply visit passiverealestateguide.com and get your free copy today. That's passiverealestateguide.com.
For a real estate investor like you seeking an income property loan, go to Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. Over the years, you've heard President Chaley Ridge generously devote her time to you here on the show as a guest. Ridge provides investment property loans in most U.S. states, and you're going to find out how they've helped more people realize their dreams of real estate financial freedom than any other mortgage lender in the entire nation when you get started at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is author Jim Rickards. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking with Daren Blomquist, Vice President of Market Economics at Auction.com. He is often taking and distilling this data and all these raw numbers and making really pretty charts and maps for you so that you can interpret them. You can learn more about him at Auction.com. Daren, one factor that governs home price appreciation by metro is migration patterns. Where are people moving? Because real estate effectively comes down to supply versus demand. I know you made a net migration by state map as well. Tell us about that trend.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Really fundamentally, if you have more people moving into a market, there's going to be more demand, which is good for the housing market.
Economics 101.
Yeah, Economics 101. More demand, and that is good for prices. It's good for rents. and rental vacancies and all of that is the more people who need a home. And so it's really as simple as that. And we looked at, one of the most fascinating sets of data that I like to look at is the Census Bureau every year puts out net migration trends by state. And so this is kind of taking out the noise of maybe sounds maybe callous to say the noise of deaths and birth affecting population, but looking at specifically migration, people moving in and out. And they have the data down to the county, which I can talk about as well. But at the state level, just to start at a higher level, you look at the heat map here, which I love the visuals that you can just kind of understand a story very quickly, is where you see the red is, guess what? It's very similar, and red means a decline in net migration. More people are moving out than are moving in. You see the red in somewhat similar spots to where we talked about seeing home prices declining. You see a big red spot over there in California, which may surprise some people. Negative 38,000 net migration number there. 38,000 more people moved to somewhere else in the country or in the world, I guess for that matter, than moved into California. By the way, this does take into account international migration. So it breaks it up by domestic and international. The last couple of years, California was seeing a big decrease in domestic net migration, but international net migration was propping up the overall net migration numbers. More people are moving in from other places in the world. Finally, in 2018, we saw that trend in domestic migration has overtook the upward trend in international migration there, and so it's negative. New York is also negative by 109,000.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And that, could be affecting those Connecticut markets that are bedroom communities to a certain extent. It's not all about migration, but that's a big one that stands out. And then you have the Illinois, I would say, is the other one that stands out with a big net migration loss of 72,000. That's probably not as much of a surprise. Illinois has been struggling economically. It has the whammies of high taxes across the board, including property taxes. New York also has that. Those are the states that are losing population. Meanwhile, the states darkest blue on this map is Florida.
Yeah, and I want to get to Florida in a moment, but just to review, the four most red states, meaning the most absolute population loss by number, not per capita, not percent, are New York, California, Illinois, and Louisiana. And we think of net migration population by state. We see a lot of in-migration in some of these southern states. Florida is, sometimes considered a southern state, sometimes considered its own thing. And tell us about Florida really leading the population in migration in the United States.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And it's probably not surprising, but it's amazing to see the numbers kind of verify what a lot of people are saying is people are moving to Florida. It's got the lower price properties, more affordable. It's got the warmer weather. I'm not saying these are necessarily in order. It's got jobs and it's got low taxes. And that combination, that tends to be a very favorable combination for where people are moving to. The baby boomer trend of as people are retiring, that's a state that's very attractive to retirees. And so that's feeding into that trend as well.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I'm glad this helps validate some of these anecdotal things. A net migration gain of 308,000 people in Florida from 2017 to 2018. Compare that to the second state that got the next most in migration. That's Texas at 188,000. Well, 308,000 in Florida. Florida has a smaller population than Texas, yet it still had substantially more in migration. And yeah, this just helps validate a lot of the things that we talk about here on the show, that people are migrating to lower cost areas. People are migrating to lower tax areas. And really, it's many of these southeastern states that have a terrific population gain, including Tennessee, the Carolinas, in Georgia. And, really, Daren, one thing a lot of people don't think about that much is the advent and the invention of the air conditioner and the proliferation over the last several decades of how air conditioners are just so cheap ever since Willis Carrier invented the first air conditioner last century.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I don't think you'd see that kind of migration without the air conditioner in place in those markets for sure.
Yeah, these places just were not that livable 50 or 100 years ago.
Yeah, people love the warm weather, but then of course, yes, they can get too warm as well in those markets. So yeah, Texas is still strong there. Yeah, a lot of these states are the low tax states with jobs. I mean, that's a combination. I think warm weather is one factor, but it's not just warm weather. I mean, you see strong. It looks like it's probably in the top 5, or at least the top 10, is Washington State in the Northwest. You do see 77,000 positive net migration there. And so that's also a no income tax state with jobs available. And home prices are pretty high there. And that's an area that is not attracting as many people there, but we're still seeing strong migration there. I think it's interesting also to look at the county level, because sometimes the state level can mask some stuff. And
Right.
I don't have a heat map at the county level, but just looking at the data here, the number 1 county with the biggest increase in net migration was Maricopa County in Arizona, with 59,000 positive net migration.
In one county.
Just for one county. Clark County in Las Vegas was number 2. And then you have Collin County, Texas, which is in the Dallas area. And then you have Polk County, Florida, which is in central Florida. They're in the Lakeland area, which is fairly close to Orlando. And so this is where we talked about California. Number 5 on the list is Riverside County, California. So even though overall in California, we're seeing net migration out, Riverside County, which is an inland county, it's not a coastal county in California, is experiencing pretty strong net migration in. And I would hypothesize that many of the people are moving from the higher cost coastal counties into a place like Riverside because of the lower housing costs there.
That's like they say in real estate, just drive until you qualify. Keep driving out of the city center, further and further away, out into the suburbs until you finally qualify for something. A lot of times in California, that phenomenon takes place there. And yeah, you say something really important. Real estate is so local. Just pull back and look at the big picture. The United States is gaining population, gets smaller. California is losing population just as far as on a net migration basis. And then just one area, Riverside, is gaining again. So each time you change in scale, it changes what this tells you. And also we want to focus, you touched on it earlier, Daren, we're just talking about net migration by state. California lost 38,000 people on a net migration basis, but they still gained a little bit of population because the birth rate has exceeded the death rate. So it's you got to look at the truth behind the numbers and what they're really telling you.
Yeah, we're looking at a specific thing here, which is net migration, and that will more directly impact housing. We got to always talk about the broader picture when we talk about these numbers and talk about them in context for sure.
Absolutely. Well, Daren, let our listeners know where they can learn more about you and what you do.
Sure. If you go to auction.com/in the news, you'll see my work there and a lot of these heat maps. We have a blog, we have articles, and I contribute a lot to that. And so it's a great place to go and find them. Articles up weekly about what's going on, trends in the housing market, what we've been talking about, other trends that we see specifically in the distressed market. So that's a great resource. And then, of course, you can browse from there on auction.com to see the actual properties we have available too, if that's of interest to your listeners, to see properties that are available for auction across the country. There's both online auctions and in-person auctions.
You can get tired eyes looking at tables and pages of data, or let Daren get the tired eyes and go ahead and look at the data he's distilled down into nice heat maps and other visually rich information. Daren, it's been great having you back on the show.
Thank you, Keith.
It was William Penn Adair that famously said, "Find out where the people are going and buy the land before they get there." You know, that's one of the more timeless real estate quotes, but it's also so simple. Find out where the people are going and buy the land before they get there. Yes, it's simple, and real estate has trends that move quite slowly as compared to the stock world and some other investments. So it really is not that hard to stay on top of some of these trends. Even in, say, 2-3 years, I expect that California, and especially New York, will keep having net out migration, and places like Florida and Texas will have net in migration. But see, the slow moving part is also a little dangerous for you as an investor. You don't want to get yourself lulled into complacency and think that you can postpone acting since trends move so slowly either. Big thanks to Daren Blomquist today. I expect to have Daren back here in the next month or two to talk about more housing trends, different trends than we discussed today, so that you can make better choices as an investor. If you like what I do on the show here, there's a great way to let me know about that. It's actually a pretty direct, efficient way of providing me with feedback on Get Rich Education, because I'm guaranteed to read it myself. It's The most efficient way to do that is a way I would greatly appreciate. If you like the show, I'd love it if you would rate and review the show on your favorite listening platform. And really the easiest way for you is to Google how to leave an Apple Podcasts review or whatever your chosen platform is. Google how to leave a podcast review, see how to leave it there, and I'll be sure to see it. I'm Keith Weinhold. Thanks for being here, but you weren't here for me. You were here for you. Have a great week. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.